name is Ashley. I oversee Creative Tides Ministry. We are a nonprofit that resources creatives both inside the church as well as just in our community. And our hope is to put on events like this and offer resources that connect you all as creatives focused around a specific topic, as well as to connect churches to help them have partnership and resources, because ministry can often be somewhat isolating. And so we want to create a network for pastors and people who serve at the church to come together and have community and get to know each other and be resourced. So tonight we're talking about creative writing and storytelling, and I'm excited to have my friends Tony and Melanie here to share. So Tony is but his day job is a discipleship pastor at Red Hills Church here in Newburgh, but he is also an author. He's written one book, and he has another book that's coming out spring of 2026. And then later we're going to facilitate a panel with Tony and Melanie Dobson, and she is a historical fiction author who has written 30 books, and so she has a lot to bring from the fiction standpoint. So we're going to get started. I'm going to invite Tony up, and he'll kick us off.
Cool. Hi, guys. How's everyone doing? So I'm kind of breaking this down into two parts. The first part is going to be more of a theology of creativity and writing and kind of how I approach writing and all that kind of stuff. And then the second part is going to be like pragmatic. So we're going to talk about like how you structure an idea, how do you nurture an idea, how do you clearly craft chapters for your book? How do you potentially put together a proposal for a publisher and all that kind of stuff, if that's something that you're interested in. So the idea, though, the working idea behind my talk tonight is holy creativity, theology, identity, and in getting started. And I have some book recommendations up here. These are just my favorite books on creativity and writing that I've read. The first is Creativity by John Cleese. He's from Monty Python. It is not a Christian book, but it is a fascinating, 80-page book on just his thoughts on the creative process. The second one is Garden City by John Mark Comer. It's his book on vocation, calling, creativity. This third book is by a gentleman named Rob Bell, which, depending on where you come from, is a curse word, his name. But this book is, I think, a fantastic book on the creative process, on writing, on calling, on stepping into. I would take his theology with a grain of salt, but if you've ever heard Rob Bell communicate, or if you've ever read his stuff, you know he is a top-tier communicator. So this book is one of his best effort to just share what he does when he's crafting something. And then Anne Lamott, if you've ever read her, she's a memoirist. She's a legend in Christian memoir writing space. And this is really the book that got her taken off. She was an English teacher and a writing teacher. And this is her curriculum, is Bird by Bird, some instructions on writing and life. So those are just, if you want to read more about the creative process, some theology behind it, some tips and tidbits, those are 4 books that have been formative for me. We're going to start first with part 1. I'm breaking this down into 2 parts. We're not going to take any breaks because we have an hour and a half and there's a lot to get through. But this first part is going to be focusing on theology and identity as it pertains to the creative process. So if you're like, hey, I came here because I want actual tips for writing, that will come in just a second. But I really think this is the expertise I get to bring to the table. I'm not a super accomplished writer like Melanie with 1,001 books under the on my resume. I've got 2 books and I've got hundreds of hours worth of sermons that I've written. And this is just me being okay, Lord, how has this process worked out in me? And if I could tell anybody anything about putting together something creative out in the world, this is what it would be, based off of my study of Scripture, my own life experience, and all that kind of good stuff. Does that sound good? Okay. This is going to be going to not breeze through, but there's going to be a lot of content coming at you. So if you're taking notes, I am happy to email my slides to anybody who wants the slides. So come up to me after this talk and I will email this to you. And then all of the stuff you see up here will be sent to your inbox sometime tomorrow. So sound good? Okay, cool. So I want to talk about the first thing. There's a key tension that Christian creatives experience in a social media world, in an attention-seeking economy, in a world where seeking as much attention as we possibly can has been monetized through social media algorithms. How do you differentiate between vocational expression, and vocational expression is the thing that God has put inside of you to add to the creation of the world? How do you differentiate between that and chasing vanity? So when I first wrote my first book, and then even more so when I wrote my second book, I really wrestled with this tension because there is kind of this trope where there's like the young pastor who speaks and then he writes books and he kind of just rides this, like they call it the evangelical industrial complex. He just kind of rides the business model. And oftentimes what I've seen being in the room with a lot of pastors and people who have spoken a lot, got large platforms and written lots of books, is there's been very little examination of this tension that I think a lot of us feel, which is this process just an ego-serving process, or am I tapping into something that God has actually put in my heart to do? And the truth is, I'm going to tell you right now, is it's usually both. It's usually going to be a little bit of like you wrestling with your ego, you wrestling with something inside of you that wants to be seen, that wants to be validated, that wants to have people kind of give you applause and praise and kudos. And there's going to be some part of you that says, God put something in me to create. And I'm using this term, God put something in you to create, because when we read the very first chapter of Genesis, we see God creating human beings, and what he does is he creates human beings with a vocation. And when I use the word vocation, I'm not using the word vocation as in just a job. I'm using the word vocation as a calling or something that's inside of you that you would do or do, whether or not you're getting paid for it. Vocation is the thing you can't help but do and contribute to the world. Whether you're a dentist or a secretary or a pastor or a writer or a professor or what have it be, vocation is something that is always going to come out of you. You're always going to find yourself turning to, no matter where your paycheck comes from. So for me, I'm differentiating vocation from job. Vocation is something deeper than that. And we see in Genesis chapter 1, so God made the wildlife of the earth according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that crawl on the ground according to their kinds. And God saw it and said that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, the creatures that crawl on the earth. Okay, so let's catch that for a second. God doesn't just say, let us create man and woman, and then he creates them. Immediately before man and woman are existing, there's vocation embedded into the creational design. Did you catch that? Let us create man and woman, and then they will rule the fish of the sea. Now, this Hebrew word rule is a complicated rule. Some people have translated that to be an excuse to exhort violence and domination on people, but that's not actually what this Hebrew word is getting at. This Hebrew word for the word rule is getting at this idea of cultivate or to make more of or to tend to. The picture that God is giving is that he's created a garden in the Garden of Eden, and he's created Adam and Eve to be his gardeners. So as we finish with the story, it says, so God created man in his own image. He created them in the image of God. He created them male and female. God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. This be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it is not just talking about making lots of babies. That's part of it. But it's also God saying, take the raw materials of this earth that I've already embedded into creation. Take the clay in the ground, take the trees, take the grass, take the water, take all of this stuff, take the rocks, and do something with it. I've started this off. Now it's your turn to take creation and what I have done and continue the process that I have started. I want to just kind of name 3 truths real quick here in the creation story. The first thing is that embedded in the Imago Dei is a royal assumption. Does everybody know what the term Imago Dei means? You can just subtly nod if you don't know. Okay, I'll explain just a little bit. Go ahead and say it. Image of God. It's Latin for the image of God. Now, this is super significant because in the ancient world, there was lots of people, like in the ancient world when Genesis would have first been like written down on paper, not told orally, right? Not spoken, because this is an oral tradition. So that means is before there was any writing, somebody would communicate the story to the people. And then after several hundred years of this being communicated orally, people wrote it down. By the time the author of Genesis actually put pen to paper to write down what had been passed down to them for generations, this idea of an image, somebody bearing the image of the divine, was something that was only reserved for the most powerful elite rulers of the time. So if you were in a Babylonian kingdom, which a lot of scholars believe that the first time this was actually written down on paper was when Israel was in captivity in Babylon. If you're in a Babylonian kingdom, there is one person in the kingdom who's considered carrying the image of God, who's considered carrying the divine image, and that is the king of Babylon. So when God has said that man and woman are made in God's image, there's this, the original readers would have read that and they would have originally known, like, oh my gosh, kings and queens. This is language of kings and queens. They are created in his image to tend to the creation that he has given them. And this work that he gives them, this is super important, is not a product of the fall. So a lot of people think, like, when I die and I go to heaven, I'm not going to have to work anymore. It's just going to be bark loungers and donuts and whatever it is and lots of movies and Netflix. This idea of work being embedded in creation happens before the serpent comes into the garden. Adam and Eve are created and given a job and a task immediately. So what that tells us is that work is not just something that you have to do because life's hard and you need to make money. Work is something that God has put inside of his people to express something of the divine image that is in them. Now, we live in a fallen world. We live in a broken world. All of us have to do things that we don't necessarily want to do to make money. But that thing inside of us, that Eden desire, that Eden drive, that inner creativity still exists in humanity. Whether or not you make money for doing the work that you do, the thing that's inside you that drives you. It's like an interesting thought experiment to kind of figure out if you should even start on the creative process. So maybe you're here and you're like, maybe I'd like to write a book someday, or maybe I want to start writing a Substack, or maybe I want to start a podcast, or whatever, and you're kind of discerning whether or not I want to start that process. Let's do this little thought experiment. I'm going to have you close your eyes, and I want you to just imagine that you were given billions of dollars. Money is not an object. You never have to do a job you don't want to do for the rest of your life. You just, billions of dollars. Now, I want you to imagine, what would you do with your life if money was not an object? And I want you to imagine, after you've done all of the vacations, and after you have done pina coladas by the pool, and after you have bought all the things you want to buy or given all the money you want to give away, what's the thing that you would do after you were bored with excess? And if you're here and you're thinking, I would want to write, I want to contribute something inside of me. I want to put pen to paper. I want to contribute to the world that way. That's a really good way of knowing if this is a part of your vocational calling. Does that make sense? You can open your eyes. And the last thing I want to point out is that we rule with God by continuing where he left off. The creative process is not just a vanity process. It's not just chasing ego. It can easily be distorted into that. But at the core, one of my favorite sayings is that the devil has no clay. Like, every bad thing that exists is the devil taking a good thing that God has already created and he's twisting it into something bad. The purest form of the creative process that's free from vanity and ego and insecurity and the need to prove yourself is something inside of you that God has put there that says it's time to continue where I left off. John Mark Comer says this: we are called to a very specific kind of work, to create a garden-like world where image bearers can flourish and thrive, where people can experience and enjoy God's generous love, a kingdom where God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven, where the glass wall between heaven and earth is thin and clear and translucent, that you don't even remember it's there. That's the kind of world we're called to create. After all, we're just supposed to continue what God started in the beginning. So that's my little preamble of a theology of creation. Now I want to just get into just kind of power through, and I might go through these slides kind of quick. So again, if you didn't get a chance to write them down, get me afterwards and I'll give you my email and I'll send them to you. First thing is that holy creativity resists chasing the vapor of platform and influence. I'm going to say this right now. There's a lot of people who've blown up their lives chasing some project, some dream, some creative expression, and they blew up their lives because they needed the platform that they got from it, they needed the attention they got from it, they needed the influence they gained from it. And what I'm talking about and what I think God has put inside of us as Christian creatives is that we're not chasing the vapor of platform and influence. Here's the deal. I have friends who have written New York Times bestsellers, and then they wrote one book that had some stuff in it that really, really ticked people off. And then their dreams of writing more New York Times bestsellers were snapped like that. It's a vapor. You can wake up one day and be like the most successful. You could get everything you're wanting to get out of your writing dreams, and then the next day have it completely go away. We're chasing something. We're resisting chasing the vapor and platform and influence. We want you to do it because you love the work. If you don't love writing, please don't do it. Like, seriously, do it because you love the work. And here's the deal. God has never promised any of us that we're going to have 100,000 followers on Instagram and make it on New York Times bestsellers list. So if you're setting out to do that, part of this is trusting God with the outcome of the work that you're doing. If you want to set out to write, and you want it to be more than just kind of for yourself, which, by the way, the majority of my writing is just for me by myself. But if you're setting out to do some type of writing and you want it to be for more than just you have to do it for a deeper reason than you want a big platform, you want a large audience, you want a big royalty check, you want all of that kind of stuff. Second thing is holy creativity is an expression of vocational calling. We talked about that at the beginning of this talk. Frederick Buechner, who's a great writer, and if you want to, he has this book called Telling Secrets About Writing. I forgot to put it up there. It's fantastic. And in that book, he says, your calling is where your great delight and the world's great need meets. Here's the deal. The vocational calling that God has put inside of you, and if you're here, I suspect you're wondering if that might be creative writing or writing of some kind. What he puts inside of you to write, what's inside of you to put out there, is going to be something that meets the deepest pains of this world. And that doesn't mean that you have to write some deep theological treatise that's going to save thousands of people. It could be as simple as that you wrote a book that was so delightful, that you wrote a piece of fiction that somebody read and they were able to get lost in, and it gave them a touch of something inside their humanity that they lost. Whatever it is, your calling is where your great delight and the world's great need meet. So holy creativity is an expression of vocational calling. The third thing is that holy creativity is more comfortable in the secret place than it is with large platforms and lots of followers. Jesus said, but when you give to the poor, don't let your hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Whenever you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, because they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by people. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. But when you pray, go to your private room, shut your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. The principle here is that, have you guys heard of Jesus' 90-10 principle? Jesus was roughly 30 years old when he started his ministry. He was roughly 33 years old when he went to the cross and died. What that means is that Jesus spent about 90% of his life in obscurity and 10% of his life in public ministry. The truth is that there's a lot of people in our world, and I'm like in a season of life where I'm actively resisting this, where we want to flip that. We want 90% of our life to be out there to be seen by everybody and 10% of our life to be hidden in obscurity. The secret place is a place where God does a dramatic work in our hearts and in our lives that allows us to then in turn do a dramatic work in the world. And again, this isn't just sermon writing. This isn't what I do, which is nonfiction books. As we'll get to in a second, if you're here and you're wanting to do storytelling and fiction writing or essays or songs or whatever it is, if you befriend the secret place and you can get comfortable in a space where it's just you and just God, and you allow his presence to be enough in your life, I promise you that's where you're formed into the type of person where whatever your creative outlet is, it is imbued with power from heaven. The fourth thing is, holy creativity roots identity in something deeper than kudos. Guys, I love kudos. I love when people tell me I did a good job. I didn't get that a lot as a kid. And when I was first starting out in preaching and writing, that quickly became a way I can get that need met. If I can be seen, I started out in theater too. If I can be seen by lots of people and get lots of people clapping for me and tell me I did a good job, then I think that's going to meet some unvalidated need that's inside of me. But the truth is, if you chase kudos, that is going to be a nice high. You're going to get that dopamine hit you're looking for, and it might last you 32 hours, and then you're going to be jonesing for it again. And the truth is you're never going to get enough good jobs. You're never going to get enough, this changed my life, this is the best thing I've ever read, this is so good, you should be a bestseller. You're never going to get enough of those to satisfy an internal ache. And I bring this up because this is where people who actually have the vocational calling to write can be separated from the people who don't. If you're in this because you need good jobs, maybe just write for you for a while. See if you still like it. See if you still get the release from expressing whatever it is you need to express. We need our identity to be rooted in something deeper than good jobs, because if it's not, when you don't get the good job, I just, as Ashley talked about, I submitted my book to InterVarsity Press for edits, and then I sent it to several friends who have been writing a lot longer than me. And one friend read the book, and he was like, Tony, the content is really good, but there's some spots where the writing is just rough. And he gave me tips on what to do and to go back and edit. But I will tell you right now, like, this is one of my heroes and somebody who I look up to just about more than anybody else. If I was doing this because I needed a good job, that would have crushed me. That would have devastated me. I love what Brennan Manning says, and this applies to all of life, but I think especially our vocation and especially creativity. To define yourself as one radically loved by God, all other forms of identity are an illusion. And Thomas Merton was asked in a New York Times article to talk about himself. Why he was a big deal at the time, and he said, "Who am I? I am one loved by Christ." Thomas Merton, who had written multiple bestsellers at that point, who was the most sought after Christian spiritual guide in the country at that point, when asked about who he is and what his identity was, he didn't talk about the 7-story mountain. He didn't talk about meeting with presidents or gurus or anything like that. He talked about being loved by Christ. The truth is like in creativity, it is so easy for ego, which is like not just like ego, not just like being full of yourself, but ego as in the sense of like your sense of self to be totally wrapped up in the project that you're working on. And if you allow yourself to be defined by the project that you're working on, it is going to crush you. Henry Nouwen says, these are the lies of identity. I am what I have. I am what I do. I am what other people say I am. And then he goes on to say, you are God's beloved. May that truth fill every corner of your life until it's all you know yourself as. Number 5, holy creativity chases contentment over comparison. I have a friend who has written several books, and like all of his books do well. Like he's never gotten any on New York Times bestsellers list, but he's able to like live off of the books that he writes, which means you're selling pretty good books and publishers want to keep publishing your stuff. But the thing is he has a friend who pretty much every book his friend writes goes on the New York Times bestseller list. And they happen to just coincidentally continually to be writing about very similar things. And I remember just like hanging out with him. And in my mind, like I don't have a platform. I'm not chasing a platform, but I love writing and I want what I'm reading. If I think it matters, I want it to reach a lot of people. And I remember sitting with him and thinking, gosh, if I could just get to where this guy's at, like, I'll be happy. I'll be good. And then I'm sitting here with him across having a coffee shop, and he's telling me how discouraged he is that his buddy keeps releasing books at the same time as him, and they end up selling 5 to 10 times more than what he sells. Comparison is awful. Comparison sucks in this. So there will always be someone more successful to you than you. Always. So you're not writing to compete. You're not writing to like get more followers. You're not writing to get more eyes on you. Okay, but we're writing for something deeper than that. But there's also this truth that is you are the successful person to someone else if you just start doing it. Lots of people, I believe more people than not, have the creative impulse to do something like paint or write a book or write songs or write poetry or take pictures or whatever it would be. I think most people have something like that in them, and I think most people don't do it. If you want to be a successful person in this process, all you have to do is start doing it. And if you're here and you're wondering like, man, like I've had this book inside of me, I've wanted to write for years or what, like do it. Start doing it. Start writing it. Start outlining it. Start getting it out. Start the process now. And even if you never sell copies or never get published, if you're the person who's sitting there and has been like, yeah, I've written a couple books. Like to every person out there, which is a lot of them, who have thought about, I think I could write a book, you are the successful person in their story. And we're not being motivated by competing with them or being better than them or being more successful to them. The point is like this is a discipline, and I actually think it's better for the world if we get started on this, not just put it off. So do the thing. Number 6, holy creativity embraces feedback over fawning. When you write something and you let someone else look at it, I don't care how secure you think you are, especially if it's someone that you really, really respect. When you write something and you let someone look at it, I want you to just like think what's going to come up inside of you in that. When you show someone your work, do you just need them to say good job? Do you just need them to say this is great? Do you just need the pat on the back? Or is there enough humility in the process to show someone your work and actually say, no, I actually want critical feedback. I want this to be stronger. Can you start this process without assuming that you already have all the skills of a New York Times bestselling author? Listen, like for a lot of us, if you've never written a book before, like it's super delusional to think that your first book is going to be like a masterpiece if you don't have critical feedback. So most of us in this room, including myself, like I'm pretending to be an expert right now, but I'm not an expert in this. Most of us in this room are not experts. Most of us in this room need feedback. We need people to look at our work and give. And if you go through the publishing process, this is where your editor becomes your best friend. But if you don't have an editor and you just want other people to read it, like and engage with it, like I would say, don't give your manuscript or whatever it is you're working on to the person who you know is just going to be proud of you no matter what. Give it to the person maybe who you think might not like you. Like give it to the toughest critic you know. And it's only going to make you strong. So I submitted the book that I just wrote to all of my cohort. I'm in a seminary cohort, and we've been doing life together for 3 years. And they're some of the most like critical thinkers I know. We spend 8 hours a day, once a month in class, literally just arguing over theology. And so I knew, like, if I send them this book, they're going to give me the tough feedback I need to make this stronger. And some of them were brutal. Some of them were really hard. But here's the deal: there's this movie. I'm not going to say the name of the movie because I don't recommend it. But there's a movie about jazz that came out about 10 years ago, and one of them he's a jazz instructor. He's a college coach or a college jazz instructor, and he has this drummer. And this jazz instructor is just abusive to his students, and he wants his students to be at the highest level of excellence possible. And when I say abusive, I mean he's like throwing cymbals at their heads and screaming at them and calling them awful things. And eventually, this jazz instructor gets fired. And one of his students, who at a certain point in the movie just becomes obsessed with this jazz instructor's approval, they sit down and they have cocktails together. And the jazz instructor's talking about how all he wanted was his next Charlie Parker or the Bird, a great jazz musician. And he said, that's all I wanted, was somebody to come from my classroom who was the next Charlie Parker. And his student says to him, well, what if you had the next Charlie Parker in your classroom and you discouraged him? And his response to them is that the next Charlie Parker would never get discouraged. The idea is, if there's something inside of you that needs to write, if there's something inside of you that needs to do it, you can subject what you're working on to the most critical feedback possible, and you will take that as fuel to make it better and make it stronger. The more insecure you are, the more egoic you are, the more pride you have in what you're doing, the less open to feedback you are, and quite frankly, the less strong your work is going to be. Number 7, holy creativity avoids allowing the platform to numb the pain of the past. So let's say this. Let's say you get the book contract. Let's say you self-publish and all of a sudden your Amazon follow or your Instagram following just starts going up like crazy. Let's say you get asked to do some speaking events. Let's say somebody comes up to you and they tell you man, I was at the lowest of the low and then I read what you wrote and it literally pulled me out of the darkness. There's something that happens in that when you get those kinds of compliments. It is like a drug. It is a high, and it will drive you crazy trying to get that. And so often, if you have watched, and if you're familiar with this, megachurch pastor after megachurch pastor who's blown up their life over some type of immorality, over some type of ego, over some type of abusive leadership, usually it's because there is something in them in their past that has gone unprocessed, that has gone unaddressed and unhealed, and they've used the platform and their writing and their speaking to be a drug that numbs them from having to actually confront what has happened to them. The truth is, we don't want our writing to just be a drug for us. And we don't want to use other people as our personal little drug supply to make us feel better about things that have happened to us. So we want to resist allowing the platform to be a drug that numbs the pain of the past, because it is the easiest thing to do to take care of some unpleasant feelings. And number 8 is the last one for this section. Holy creativity beholds and proclaims. Here's what I mean. My favorite Christian creatives, whether we're talking about Bono from U2, or we're talking about Corey Asbury, or we're talking about Terrence Malick, the director, or we're talking about Switchfoot, or we're talking about John Mark Comer, whoever it might be, C.S. Lewis, my favorite creatives are the people who have spent more time beholding the love and the beauty and the goodness of God than they have spent time putting content out there. Your best work is going to come when you are simply proclaiming what you have already beheld alone in the secret place with God. And the truth is, if you aren't spending much time beholding God, or as Jesus says in John 15, abiding in the vine, allowing God to abide in you, to dwell in you, and allowing yourself to live and dwell in God, if you aren't beholding him often, you don't have much to proclaim about him. And really, at the end of the day, whether what you're wanting to do is write nonfiction or fiction, if you're wanting to approach this topic, from a Christian identity paradigm, everything you do, whether it's direct or indirect or metaphor or not metaphor, everything you do is going to be proclaiming what you have beheld. And so our hope as Christian creatives is that what we're doing is just proclaiming in one way or another what we have seen in God.